The Penguins have a massive problem on their hands because we have new information regarding Sidney Crosby and his future with the franchise officially being up in the air, and this has left Kyle Dubas with a huge decision to make. Hello everyone, welcome back to Penguins Digest. We have some insane news regarding Sidney Crosby and how Pittsburgh actually might be trading him very, very soon. But before we get into that and why it could happen, make sure you guys do, of course, subscribe to the channel. We are at 67.5% of viewers who are not subscribed. So if you are in that large portion of Penguins fans who are not subscribed to the channel, make sure you hit that sub button. It's the best place of your Pittsburgh Penguins fans to be. We are covering everything Pittsburgh Penguins. Maybe a Sidney Crosby trade, Erik Karlsson, Rickard Rakell, Brian Russ, Evgeni Malkin. There's a lot going on in Pittsburgh, and Kyle Dubas is hoping to make the team better in the long run, but maybe dismantle them in the short term. Now, I've rambled on for a minute here. Let's get into the bulk of the video. So, obviously, we have had this big article from Josh Yohe, of course, one of the best Penguins writers in the business. So, this was, trading Sid always seemed like a silly fantasy for fans in other markets, but it feels like there is a problem now. Pat Brisson said it's a non-issue as long as the Penguins are good this season. And let's be honest, they probably won't be my column. Now, of course, I think Pittsburgh Penguins fans want the Penguins to be very, very solid, but I'm not sure if the Penguins can be that good this season. I think the Penguins have made a lot of decent moves over the past offseason to show the direction they're going. In Kyle Dubas' first offseason, over 2 years ago, I think he showed that he wanted to try and give the Penguins one more shot at the playoffs, but unfortunately it didn't work for a multitude of things. But ever since then, I think the Penguins have been making good moves. I think, that they're holding on to a lot of assets in Rakell, Russ. They're going to be selling a lot recently. I don't know if it's going to be Sidney Crosby, but there could be a lot going on over there. So obviously, the article did mention what matters now is that Pat Brisson, obviously Sidney Crosby's agent, appears to want the Penguins captain to be traded. Either that, or he's publicly pressuring Kyle Dubas to scrap the rebuild that Pittsburgh's president of hockey operations and general manager has been orchestrating for about 18 months to load up before Crosby retires. It's one or the other, and that changes things. Now, obviously, that is huge for Penguins fans because, I as someone who's been watching the Penguins for a long time, I'm not sure if it's smart to try and hold off the rebuild for a player like Sidney Crosby, but on the other hand, Sidney Crosby is arguably, maybe not even arguably, he's the second best Pittsburgh Penguin ever. And someone, Mario Lemieux, who's probably one of the greatest hockey players ever. And some people will argue he's the greatest hockey player ever. So be mine. Again, Mario Lemieux is, not something to be looked down upon. So, I think it does make a lot of sense, maybe not to trade Crosby, but to try and make the playoffs and win the Stanley Cup. I don't think the Penguins are in a place for that. Their core is a lot older. A lot of their younger guys aren't going to be able to support them right now. So, logistically, if maybe Sidney Crosby wasn't Sidney Crosby, I know, saying that is tough, he would probably be traded, but he's Sidney Crosby, and that's super important to Penguins faithful, to the city of Pittsburgh, to all Penguins fans that have been watching him since he came into the league 21 years ago. He's been one of the best players in the league ever since. For a long time, he was the best player in the NHL, so I can understand completely why Penguins fans want him to stay on the team, but that might not be the truth because, obviously, Sidney Crosby has not spoken out about wanting to be traded. That is not something he said, and that's something I don't think he will ever say. I think he just wants to win, and if that's, maybe you look under the bed for that maybe that's him signaling he wants the team to get better or he wants to leave. I don't know. I'm not sure about that, but Josh Yohe did say in his article, I don't think Crosby told Brisson to make those comments. What I do believe is that Brisson, who has known Crosby since the player was a boy, can sense the angst. And so he spoke out on behalf of his client. Just as Dubas works for the Penguins and not for Crosby, Brisson works for Crosby and not the Penguins. And those realities are a problem here. And obviously, some of those quotes were, it's been 3 years and they haven't made the playoffs. It all depends on how Sid is going to be and how the team is going to do. I maintain the same position that I do believe he should be playing playoff hockey every year, in my opinion. Now, I don't even think that's Pat Brisson's opinion. I think the Pittsburgh Penguins faithful, anytime Crosby is on the team, you do have that itch to make the playoffs. To see a guy like Sidney Crosby in the playoffs, we got a little bit of a taste of it in the Four Nations, We're going to get it again at the Olympics. And we know when Sidney Crosby is playing, best on best, the best kind of hockey, that is really where he shines. We know Crosby is magnificent. And, if the Penguins want to try and make the playoffs, I don't think it would be the worst decision ever because, for Crosby, it's worth it. For Malkin, it might be worth it. For Letang, it might be worth it because those guys are super loyal Pittsburgh Penguins players and some of their in the sunset of their careers. So it's interesting to see what Kyle Dubas would do. I think a lot of Penguins fans will be more in favor of Crosby than they will be Dubas, of course. And I would agree with that sentiment because, it's Sidney Crosby at the end of the day. So there's a lot of things going on there. And I think an interesting thing about Crosby is, as I just said, he is still one of the best players in the NHL. Obviously, he said in the quotes, there's a lot of noise as far as, does he want to leave? Where can he go? Everybody's got the team they want me to go to. For me, I still go into every game wanting to win, and those things aren't really in my control. So obviously, he hasn't outright said he wants to be traded. Again, I said I don't think he will ever go on record of saying that. And that I think something to look at is I still going to want to go into every game to win. That is exactly what Sidney Crosby does. Because if you look at his stats, just last year, in his 20th season, he had 91 points and 33 goals in 80 games. And, Sidney Crosby's not getting any younger, but his play is not falling off at all. Obviously, he's not that 120-point guy anymore, maybe not. But 91 points in 80 games, I still think he's a top 10 center in the NHL. Arguably a top 10, top 15 player in the league. Sidney Crosby's still elite, and he's still amazing. And I can completely understand why the Penguins faithful would want him to stay on the team because he's Sidney Crosby. How can I disagree with that? He's Sidney Crosby. But at the end of the day, hockey is a business. And one team that has been brought up a lot for a team for Crosby to go to is, of course, none other than his childhood team, the Montreal Canadiens. So this was brought up on TSN and said, would you trade Ivan Demidov for Crosby 1-for-1? And just, reading social media and everything about this, it doesn't seem like either team really wants this to happen. I think Penguins fans would be disappointed if all they got back for Crosby was Demidov. And then if you look at it the other way, for Montreal Canadiens fans, they don't want to trade someone who's arguably going to be a franchise winger for them for 38-year-old Sidney Crosby. But you know what? For me, this makes more sense for Montreal than it really does for Pittsburgh. Obviously, Demidov really hasn't played that much in the NHL, of course. Only 2 games regular season and then 5 games in the playoffs. Obviously, a very, very strong prospect. He's only 19 years old. And you know what? I will say, looking at the Penguins lines, or the Montreal Canadiens lines, they could certainly use Sidney Crosby. Every team can use Sidney Crosby. But looking at the Montreal Canadiens as sort of a destination spot, he would fit right there on first-line center. No disrespect to Nick Suzuki. I think Sidney Crosby comes in and is their first-line center. But you have to trade something to get something. And if Demidov's that piece, I'm not really sure if the Penguins fans would be very happy about that. Because if Sidney Crosby gets traded, you want a haul and even more. You want everything for Sidney Crosby because he is Sidney Crosby at the end of the day. And then, obviously, the Penguins' lines are still also very good. The forward core is pretty good. So if Demidov was there, I think, he adds to a decent prospect pool of, the McGrodys, the Kindles, players like that. But I just don't see that happening. I think it's a crazy trade to think about, and I don't really see that happening if that was me. And if it was 1-for-1, I think Penguins fans would be up in arms because you want more for Sidney Crosby. I want draft picks. I want Demidov. I want everything because it's Sidney Crosby. He's a top 5 player, arguably all time. So, Penguins fans, let me know what you guys think. Is Sidney Crosby going to be on the move? And if he is, obviously he gets to pick his destination. What team is he going to go to? Montreal has been in the headlines a lot. Same thing with Colorado, of course, who I didn't mention. But let me know, guys, what are you guys thinking about Sidney Crosby and the state of the Penguins? Should they rebuild and trade him? Or should they try and push for the playoffs like his agent is saying and keep Crosby until he retires and just go for that one last push and see if they can get Crosby another cup? Let me know, guys, in the comments. And as always, subscribe for Penguins news. And we'll see you in the next video. Peace out, everyone.